My name is Larry, head of ecosystem at IoTeX. We are a layer 1 blockchain focused on machines and connecting the data and value that they produce to the chain, kind of providing proofs of things you do in the real world in order to trigger smart contract incentives. We got started in 2017, now a top 100 project, and yeah, we have an interesting view of what consensus means, because we try to drive consensus about what happens in the real world and relay that to the blockchain to do things in the digital world. So yeah, happy to dive in more later.
Hey guys, I'm Sam, founder of Frax. Frax is an algorithmic stablecoin, one of the largest stablecoins actually, around 3 billion in circulation. We've grown pretty big in just about 14 months. Protocol revenue is over 150 mil. One of the largest DeFi platforms on over 12 EVM chains and others. So yeah.
Hey guys, I'm Mike, and we're building a decentralized e-agreement signing and execution platform on Ethereum and Arweave. Of course, we're also deployed on EVMs. So we have several product offerings. Right now, we have the PDF signing product. We have a smart agreement product, which is powered by Chainlink oracles and keepers, and we're going to have a token table that's much like a mirror table but on chain.
Cool. So let's just set the stage and make sure everyone's all on the same page. What does consensus mean to you?
I guess I'll start. That's a very broad question. You know, I think consensus to me means collective truth. And when you think about what that actually means, it's not just one person saying what the truth is. It's everybody not only agreeing with it, but also able to verify it for themselves, right? And I think, you know, a lot of projects use the collective truth that Chainlink provides in the DeFi space. You know, I think the DeFi renaissance was really triggered by the fact that everyone can finally agree what the price of a Bitcoin was at any specific time, right? And on top of this collective truth are all these new type of economies you can build, right? Without that collective truth, you know, the foundation is shaky, then everything built on top of it is also going to be shaky. So a lot of mumbo jumbo, but hopefully that this sets the stage.
Yeah, it's a pretty open-ended question, but I think consensus is social coordination, right? And all of this stuff requires coordination of people, machines, and everything that don't trust each other, don't know each other, don't even know where each other is, right? And so like one thing that's interesting is, you know, if you run an Ethereum full node, you actually keep track of, you know, $500 billion worth of value of other people's assets, or you basically come to consensus with what value they have without knowing who any of these people are. I think that's a pretty profound thing.
To me, consensus, when I hear the word consensus, I always think of, you know, governance. So DAO governance is a big issue right now. We don't want to call a DAO just because you have a Discord group chat, right? You want to build these styles with decentralized tooling like Snapshot, like Gnosis, like D-Work, which is a new product that they had invented lately. But I think consensus really comes down to how you incentivize the community to kind of participate in, you know, the general direction of the project. So that's DAO governance.
So it's this idea of governance, of collective truth, of coming together in new ways to socially coordinate to solve problems. And it doesn't really make sense to me, because in this day and age we have more data than ever before. Why do we find it so difficult to find consensus in the 21st century, and what's important about that?
I really like Sam's point about social coordination, right? You think about different blockchains as different kind of countries. Like the US, we elect congressmen, we have this checks and balances system, and we have a president, and these kind of checks and balances define the rules of how everyone can operate, right? Then you have countries like You know, China, they also have consensus about the rules, but that's decided by one single dictator or, you know, authoritarian. And, you know, that allows them to move a lot faster than the checks and balances system of the US, right? You kind of think about it as like the Bitcoin way of reaching consensus. Everyone has to solve this very hard, computationally intensive puzzle in order to qualify to be a validator. Proof of stake, you have to prove that you have skin in the game, and then you could be a validator. You know, so I really think about how people just balance the different perspectives of whatever kind of group they're coordinating, right? You have a consensus amongst 3 people, you can have consensus amongst 300 million people. It really just goes down to how you define these systems and the data that's, you know, transferred between, the information that's kind of transferred between these people is very important.
Yeah, I just think it's really cool that, you know, crypto as an industry started these conversations with like everyone in the world, right? Like before, no one was like talking about what's money, what gives value to money, what's like stable, like is Bitcoin worth anything, or is anything worth anything, or whatever. I just think it's awesome that like this crypto is only like about a decade old, but like the collective consciousness of everyone online that's talking about it is, you know, questioning value, consensus, all of these things. So like the thing we're really interested in at Frax is like, how do you transfer stable value on chain in a trustless manner? Like I've always been really interested in stablecoins. People call me a stablecoin maximalist, which is like the view that like most of the value on blockchains will be stable token transfers for commerce and things like that. So it's just really cool to have all these discussions of like, how do you keep stability? What is stability? Is it a basket of consumer goods? Is it like, you know, is it the dollar? But the dollar's inflating, so is it really valuable? And who gets to decide that and all this stuff? So it's just awesome that just as an industry, crypto's actually, you know, had, you know, collectively made people have this conversation and these events and everything. I don't think, you know, Web 2 and the stuff before it really got people to think about what actually value is and social coordination is.
I think the core value of cryptocurrencies is immutability, right? So you know, everything that's verifiable on chain, they're viewable on chain. So everybody that's, you know, they're like, we can have we can launch a round with VC money, but we can do the receipts all on Aragon, right? And then that's consensus. Everything's on chain. Everything's verifiable. There's no like funny business or side letters for investors. You can go to that address and see if they get a token and how long they get to invest. Like nobody gets a shorter invest. Nobody gets a side letter. So I think that's a cool thing. Like you, it's almost like you can make sure that nobody doesn't obey the rules. And also, you know, at EthSign, what we do is the core of EthSign is consensus. So you sign any contract, and if all parties consent, they're viewable on chain. That means that contract is automatically agreed. And we have a really cool product which is called the Smart Agreement. That's a escrow of funds, and you know, you can set some predefined trigger conditions and logic. And once those are fulfilled and all parties agree to it, the funds will be automatically transferred. So that's a consensus use case in actual contracts.
So it's almost like these technologies we're building, whether it's blockchains or smart contract applications, they're sort of revealing new ways to look at the world, giving us new perspective on things as fundamental as value and agreement and what an agreement really should be. This kind of makes me think of something Sergey Nazarov often references, the co-founder of Chainlink, references where there's going to be various problems that reveal themselves that are inherent to traditional industries that make cryptographic instruments like blockchains, like smart contracts, the consumer choice, or maybe not even the consumer choice, but the consumer necessity. What are some recent trust-based issues that you guys have seen that have occurred recently in traditional industries or in the world, and how do blockchains and smart contracts provide a solution to those issues?
Yeah, I think of Web3 as it's all about incentives, right? These are incentives driven by layer one blockchains that house smart contracts that define open source code that basically allow people to coordinate, right? And I think trust in today's society is very broken. Who do you trust and why you trust, I think, is one of the biggest questions of this new generation. We live in a system where everyone goes to court and sues people, at least in the States, right? And the definition of truth is decided through, this long litigation process that is all about penalties. You do something bad, you get penalized for it, right? The way I think about Web3 is you get incentives for doing things well or doing things better than you would, right? You're incentivized to do a better job, whether you are, it's all about like a two-sided marketplace, right? There's always someone incentivizing someone to do something they wouldn't necessarily do on their own accord. It's at the layer one level, from a validator's perspective. If you are running a node for a layer one, you're not doing that for shits and giggles on the weekend. You're doing it because there's an incentive to do so, right? And all the way at the application level. If you are providing liquidity to a DeFi app, you're not parking your tokens just because there is a promised and very transparent yield that you'll be getting, right? So the fact that this is all open source and verifiable, these are like buzzy words today, but so important in the grand scheme of things, I think.
So yeah, I mean, money, right? So that's the biggest thing, right? So for people that aren't familiar with stablecoins, they're tokens that hold their value constant per token. So usually they're all pegged to the dollar. There's euros and other stuff as well. There's two types of stablecoins that are predominant. So one is just a token that is backed by fiat money in a bank account. So like if you've heard of Tether, USDC, BUSD, there's basically a bank, and then they tokenize these, and you can come and redeem them for dollars that you can get wired to your bank account. There's three predominant large decentralized stablecoins right now that have over $1 billion in market cap, and Frax is one of them. The other is Terra and DAI. And the thing that's really important here is like a lot of like recent events, if everyone's like following along, is like if you don't own your actual assets, right, they can always be taken away from you. And there's now more and more reminders every single day, right? People didn't used to collectively talk about this, right, because everything was cool, and the past like 10 years, these topics didn't come up as much, but more and more, almost like every month, you have examples of if you don't actually own your own assets, if you don't actually own your own cash, which almost no one does, they're all bank deposits, right? If you don't actually own your own hard assets, then they can always be taken away from you, right? And so there's this two kinds of stable coins that I think, that we're really focused on the decentralized kind, which is all of the assets are held on the blockchain. There's no bank account. There's absolutely no company. There's nothing. And so these three stable coins, Frax, Terra, and UST, and DAI are basically the largest decentralized ways to transfer value for you to actually own your own cash, basically, right? And so I think that's one of the most interesting and unique uses of blockchain that's actually came out. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all three of them use Chainlink oracles. So
yes, they do.
Yeah, I think a really great use case for solving trust with blockchain is the freelancing industry. So a lot of the freelancing platforms, you kind of have to trust the platform in order to, make the transaction, and, the other end, they do the work and submit the work. But with cryptocurrencies, you can kind of freelance everybody in the world because everything's on chain. You can send Bitcoin to anybody that has a wallet, that has a Bitcoin wallet, or you actually 20 tokens to anyone that has a MetaMask, right? But that allows borderless transactions with immutable money. And then you can also, ensure that trust is insured with smart contracts. So smart contracts are a way to escrow your funds, and you can you can also, you can almost like vote on the quality of the work collectively as a DAO. And if the work is good enough, like you see that, if that work, say it's not quantifiable, right? If it's quantifiable, you can just use EthSign, then smart agreement, they do the escrow for you. But let's talk about some issues that's not tangible, like not quantifiable terms. You can vote on it as a DAO, and then collectively, if people think it's good work, that person should get paid X amount, and that escrow just passes, right? So there's nothing better than that, because like there's a lot of issues involved in Fiverr, these current freelancer platforms. Sometimes the freelancer gets not paid enough. They get scammed by the payer, right? They say the work's not enough, but why does one person has the decision right to that? And vice versa. A lot of times people pay and they don't get the work that they expected. So freelancing is really what I think will be big in this industry in the next years to come.
Yeah, so let's build on this idea. You guys mentioned many use cases that are happening today. Let's imagine a future where crypto is super commonplace. The world governments use it. All the institutions are on the chain, are on blockchain, and using smart contracts. What are some future maybe sci-fi applications of blockchain and smart contracts that really excite you, that make you want to continue pushing this industry forward?
Yeah, I think IoTeX works on a very futuristic concept, right? Going back to incentives, I think it started with DeFi, right? For the first time, thanks to Chainlink oracles, you can finally trust the prices. You can build all these lending, borrowing, two-sided marketplaces, and you can stake your assets and get yield, right? That was maybe starting in 2020, and now we're in the era of GameFi, right? Or we were most of 2021, this play-to-earn concept, where you do things in the digital world to earn digital assets or digital reputation, right? So what's next? I think the thing that's next, and what IoTeX has been focusing on for maybe the past 4 years, is can you do things in the real world and you earn digital assets and digital reputation, right? Think about all the things that we can incentivize people to do better. Be healthier, take 10,000 steps, burn 100 calories a day. There's an insurance company that would love to incentivize you to do that, right? Take more environmentally friendly transportation. There are cities and governments that would directly incentivize you to do that. And when I think about this, this is what taxes are, right? Taxes and all these tax breaks that these big corporations get are incentives from the government to do something that they can't deliver, is why people buy commercial real estate and provide housing and get massive tax breaks, right? So think about all the things that, even incentivizing people to come here today with an NFT, right? What IoTeX is really working on is using machines as proofs of things that you do in order to trigger these incentives, right? Visiting, completing an itinerary of the 5, coolest locations in Santa Monica. Maybe Santa Monica is going to pay you to visit those locations and experience a side of a city that you hadn't seen before, right? Infinite amount of things that we do every day in the real world can be incentivized, but the real problem is, how do you prove verifiably to others things that you do in the real world? It's kind of like if you go play golf and you claim that you scored the course record. Okay, prove it to me, right? Prove to me that you've done something and the smart contract will reward you. So this is the space that IoTeX operates in. We combine tamper-proof hardware that does what it's told with tamper-proof software that does what it's told to enable these tamper-proof type of incentives. So I think blockchain and IoT is something that is going to be very interesting for people once we mature it.
Yeah, I think in the next 2 to 3 years, in the future, there will probably be stablecoins that are not pegged to a national currency, but that'll actually be price stable to a standard of living. So that's something pretty futuristic. That would be a pretty big first that I think is coming. We're working at Frax, something like that. But one of the cool things is, most people until recently they don't think about the dollar as actually soft pegged to a basket of consumer goods called the CPI. And until recently, which there's rising inflation, so people are actually talking about, isn't it supposed to be pegged? Why isn't it? Why is everything getting more expensive? I thought the dollar actually was supposed to stay, relatively stable in purchasing power. Most people, subtly didn't really think about the fact that the reason the dollar is valuable is that it keeps everyone's standard of living the same, right? So if you have a certain amount of dollars, you should be able to afford about the same, give or take, same 12, eggs, carton of milk, same price per year, everything in terms of rent, in terms of, all of the pieces of the consumer price index, which is the thing the U.S. government reports every month and tries to, usually, to keep the dollar pegged to, except for recently, if people have been following along, the inflation rate is the highest it's been in decades. So the cool thing from this, though, is that if you can actually bring on-chain the price of consumer goods and the things in a developed economy that you actually want to have a currency remain stable in, you could actually create a cryptocurrency that's supposed to stay relatively the same price against a basket of really important consumer goods, which is what the dollar has been. And there's doubts on like how good it's going to continue to do that, but that's the real kind of futuristic on-chain stability that I'm really excited for. So the thing that we've been working on with Chainlink that I'm really excited to say is we're actually developing a CPI oracle with Chainlink and developing the first algorithmic CPI-based stablecoin at Frax. So Frax is actually going to have two stablecoins in the protocol. One is the dollar-pegged stablecoin that has billions in supply, but the second one is actually called the FPI, which is the Frax price index, and it's actually going to be the first non-sovereign pegged stablecoin, which means it's not pegged to a national currency. So that should be really exciting.
Yeah, where do you get the data for that basket of goods, Sam?
So we're working together to first just bring the U.S. government's actual report of the CPI on-chain. However, after that's on-chain, we can actually bring in other data sources. There's other teams and groups working to find accurate pricing data outside of the United States, globally, or even hyper locally, depending on how granular we want the actual data. But first, it's from BLS.gov, which is the U.S. Department of Labor Services, which is what conducts the Consumer Price Index survey every month, which is what the Federal Reserve looks at every month when Jay Powell comes to have that press conference and everyone's like, oh shit, is inflation bad? He basically looks at that and is like, and then either contracts the supply of the dollar, which hasn't happened recently, they've only printed, but or they basically report what the average inflation is on a 12-month running basis, which right now is actually really bad. Does anyone know off the top of their head? Does anyone know what it is? What the government reports the inflation rate is? 12%. What is it? Yeah, it's right around 6.5% to 7.5% if you do rolling 12 months. Then that's what the government actually reports the inflation rate to be. So if you just hold $100 in your wallet for an entire year, its purchasing power will go down about 7% in 1 year currently. So that's how quickly the purchasing power of the dollar is going down as of right now. According to the government. There's a lot of people that say the government's making it look good and like they're fudging the numbers or whatever, but those are like little political types of conversations.
So we can't actually even come to a consensus on what the government is reporting, if
Right.
that is accurate.
Right. We need a decentralized stablecoin.
Yeah, I hope FPI happens soon. Maybe we can solve this issue. Mike, you're working on a smarter agreement framework to help lots of people come to consensus in novel new ways. Can you talk a little bit about EthSign and what Web3 technologies you use to reach consensus?
Of course. So we have several product offerings. The most simple one's decentralized Docusign. So that the the workflow for the users is pretty simple. It's just like a Docusign. And the cool thing about it is that you don't need to hold any native tokens to interact with this Web3 product, because we integrate something called the meta transactions. And what we do is that we sponsor your gas fees on certain chains like Matic. These L2s, they're super cheap to use, so we deposit a couple $1,000s there. It's good for a couple months, like 10,000, 20,000 users to use it, and they don't have to have any native Matic to sign the documents on chain. And every single one of those digital signature, and they're all the trials of the signature. So when, who signed what, that's hashed and stored on EVM chains, and essentially eventually gets stored on Ethereum. So it's also protected by that layer of security that Ethereum has to provide. And then the actual PDF contracts, we store those on decentralized storage networks such as Arweave and IPFS. So we run some nodes between IPFS and Arweave, because Arweave, it takes probably 20 to 30 minutes to store a piece of PDF document. A lot of these infra layer technologies are not very mature, so we try to provide the users as much good experience as possible. That's why we run some nodes between the two decentralized network and kind of take advantage of IPFS's instantaneous upload speed. But our smart agreement product, which is powered by Chainlink oracles and keepers, we call it a smart agreement because it's really smart because it's self-enforceable with predefined on-chain and off-chain conditions. And the on-chain world is a separate world from off-chain world. So to feed those data from off-chain to on-chain, you kind of need an oracle. And Chainlink is doing exactly that between the two worlds, and interoperability between the two worlds. So, a really practical use case for smart agreement is a KPI-based investment launchpad. So we work with investment DAOs to customize these things, and they can predefine some KPIs such as daily active users, follower count, how much liquidity you have in the DeFi protocol, and then invest that investment contract accordingly. So these are the things that we try to really achieve eventually, and to decentralize DAOs, to really provide decentralization for DAOs, right? We're trying to build more DAO tools for these organizations to really become DAOs in the future.
So if you guys are thinking about forming a DAO, talk to Mike, he's your man.
You sign any documents on chain, you talk to me.
All right, guys, let's give the panelists a round of applause. And now I want to open it up to the audience for some questions. Here, Kevin, this guy's got a question over here.
Thanks. I got two questions. One is when you build DAOs, and you need to address the problem of providing incentives of real-world work to this virtual world. So you need to transfer your work into tokens. But when you really run organization and things are really complicated, things are not so quantifiable. How do you think about a strategy? That's really important, but also to actually do work is important. How do you really value things? I think that's really important question. How do you guys address it? And the other is for Sam. So FPI, for the mechanism, so you have different the purchasing power for different regions, but so for the purchasing power for one token in different regions should then worth differently. But then one FPI should be exchangeable and should worth the same. So how do you really address this issue? Thanks.
I'm sorry, what's the first question?
So how do you
quantify the unquantifiable? faced with it?
Yeah,
Quantum
so
physics.
you can't really quantify the unquantifiable. It's really two parts, right? So for the unquantifiable parts of the agreement, that's why we have the PDF contract, right? And then you sign that, that's stored on chain. It's viewable by the related parties that have the key to that document. So that document is encrypted with asymmetrical elliptical encryption. And then, every signature is viewable on chain. That means the related parties can still verify those things. But then there's quantifiable parts, right? Like liquidation problems of any agreement. You run into money issues. I send you whatever amount of money by X month, and that's all. You can. It's just if statements, right? So you can code those.
Yeah, one part of your question was like, how do you define real work, right? And this is already stuff we do today. Everyone in this room should know that blockchain is not a panacea. It's not going to solve everything. But when combined with other technologies like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, you start to get a nice tech stack that can at least give multiple layers of protection against the things you're trying to prove, right? When we think about proving facts about the real world, why do you trust your iPhone to open with your face? Why do you trust your Ledger hardware wallet to protect your private keys? Why do you trust your credit card to not, be exploitable and, will leak your money? There's a special type of hardware. It's called secure hardware. It's a chip on your credit card. It's the chip in your Ledger hardware wallet. It's the chip in your phone that does your Face ID, stores your passwords and everything. It's basically a way to isolate very sensitive processes and prove verifiably, without a shadow of a doubt, these like mission critical type of things. The issue is these things are very expensive and not easy to put into every single sensor and every single type of device. But that's on the IoT side. Even on the AI side, we get asked this question all the time. How do you prove things without a shadow of a doubt? There's two big questions related to that. Are you who you say you are? And are you doing what you say you're doing, right? Are you who you say you are is all about decentralized identity and being able to prove who you are to someone that doesn't trust you, right? If I tell you, hey, I'm a world-class karate expert, how do you believe me? You don't, right? Unless I have a credential to prove it to you. How do you, if
Show
I
me the
graduate?
certificate. Show me the belt.
Exactly. Show you the credential, right? And decentralized identity is a very overlooked concept in crypto. I think NFTs somehow overshadowed it a bit, but DID was the original NFT, except the credentials that are tied to your decentralized identity are non-transferable. And I think that's a very important piece.
I think the question, the important part is is more on the side of when you really build a DAO, and it's just like build a company, a startup. The contract, where the contract come from? You sign a contract with your boss, but your boss kind of like exploit you, and you really have to agree with it. Or there is some way that can really fall into our blockchain community, this decentralized spirit, so that it's more equal and justify. It's on the justification and this side of contract.
So for DAO building, whoever that starts the DAO, it's not going to start in a decentralized manner. It's just impossible, in my personal opinion. You always start with or any project, right? You always start with a centralized group of people, and then you slowly roll out decentralization. That's why at EthSign we still don't call ourselves a DAO yet. We have a core team, and we call ourselves that because we're not a DAO in essence. But slowly and surely we want to roll out these governance tools that, but before that you kind of have to make sure your community is big enough and scaled enough to kind of make sure that decentralization happens and governance happens, right? Because if not enough members of your community participate in the vote, and all that participate in the vote of determining important issues are the core people, that's no different than a company-made decision, right? So I hope that answers your question.
Code is law.
Code is law.
Thank you. So the question is actually for all three of you, and it doesn't necessarily apply to your projects, but just projects in general in the digital asset space. When do projects normally decide to engage with Chainlink? Is it at the white paper level, like we value oracles, we just don't know if we want to use centralized versus decentralized? At what stage does the project usually say, hey, we want to engage Chainlink?
We just love Chainlink. So as soon as we could talk, but they have pretty rigorous standards for having price feeds and these things. That's why they're like the industry standard. There has to be a lot of different sources of liquidity and everything. So like Frax, the governance token, FXS, and all these other stuff in our ecosystem uses Chainlink oracles, but we can't get them on day one because there's not independent sources of liquidity to report for pricing and things like that. So as soon as possible is usually for DeFi projects. But then with something like our FPI oracle for the consumer price index, that's something that was never done before. So we started working on it together, and I think it took a couple months. But yeah.
To also just answer that question, come talk to me now after this. Let's have a conversation. You can also find me online, on Telegram, on our Discord. We're always happy to chat about how you can use Chainlink oracles.
I think it depends on what layer you're building on too, right? If you're a DApp using Chainlink, you know, whenever you're managing a significant amount of money, you owe it to your users to use Chainlink oracles, right? If you're a layer 1 blockchain like IoTeX, you might as well get in the queue now because it takes forever to get integrated.
Hey man, I'm not the integrations manager. I'm just community manager.
Yeah, but you know, from our perspective, this is something that's in such high demand from all of our DApps. Like, you know, IoTeX, we do this machine-fi stuff. We have game-fi stuff. We also have a DeFi ecosystem, and there's a lot of big projects that won't launch until Chainlink is on board. You know, Cheetah, Aave. We've talked to all of them, and you know, they're queued up waiting for Chainlink oracles to launch, which are coming on IoTeX, hopefully by the end of this month, but already on testnet, so we're excited.
Yeah, he has a really good point. Just on Frax alone, for example, Chainlink secures like around $6 billion worth of assets. So it's really important for DeFi stuff.
Yeah, and you know, like both of them said, we use it as soon as we could, but also, you know, we are building on different layers, right? You have the most basic layer, you're building, you know, smart contract platforms or blockchains. We're building end user applications. That means we kind of waited for Keeper's network to be released for our smart agreement product, and then right now, you know, we waited that, and then we integrated it. So we waited it for a while, and we used it as soon as we could.
You're one of our first Keepers projects, I think, right?
I think it's
or maybe the
first.
The first?
Yes.
Oh yeah, Mike. Any other questions from the audience? Yes. You?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I didn't see it.
All right,
Mike.
yeah.
Sorry.
So I have a question. I find it very interesting, this idea of a stablecoin that is backed by a standard of living. So currently, right, stablecoins are either like fully backed or they're algorithmic, which to me is just being backed with a like layer of abstraction, basically. So how do you, I'm just wondering, like, can you go into a little bit of the mechanics of how you're going to back a stablecoin by a standard of living? Like, are you going to have like an ETF of commodities where like someone can always turn in a coin for like a dozen eggs and a blanket or something?
So, would love to talk to you nonstop about this because it's actually like everything I'm like passionate about doing. But to basically give you a quick short answer, like I was saying before, there's essentially two types of ways to keep something stable on chain, right? Like if you just go for a second and look at the dollar-based stablecoins, right? Like you were saying, there's algorithmic ones, which basically means there's no assets off-chain, there's no bank account, there's no dollars anywhere, right? And then there's the what people call fiat-based stablecoins, which are just tokenized versions of deposits in a bank. So you can actually give up the token for $1, and they'll wire you the actual money, right? And so there's obviously a clear issue there, right? The fiat coins are a custodial product. You don't ever actually own claims on a blockchain to anything, right? You basically trust that the bank or the USDC, which is Coinbase, or Tether, which is Bitfinex, will give you the actual fiat cash if you go to redeem them, right? Algorithmic stablecoins don't have a bank, right? So like you were saying, they use on-chain collateral like cryptocurrencies. They're backed by loans and either variable interest loans or fixed income loans and things like that. Like MakerDAO has over-collateralized loans. Frax actually has a mixture of all of these, which is pretty interesting. So one of the things we developed at Frax is like the name stands for fractional algorithmic stablecoin. So the point is that there's on-chain collateral, but it's not dollars, right? Because there's no bank account. Frax is fully decentralized, and there's also algorithmic supply changes, so that the amount of currency is always equal demand to make each token $1. If you're gonna create something that's not a dollar a token, but the average of a basket of consumer goods, you can use this exact same model, right? As long as you have a variation of price feeds, of exchange rates between, the FPI stablecoin and the food part of the consumer price index. It's basically the same thing, but just with multiple pieces in a basket rather than trying to peg to $1 price feed, seeing like what the dollar price of a stablecoin is. It's more difficult, obviously, but the abstraction is the same. And that's why I think like the next generation of on-chain stability is basically things that actually are useful on-chain without being pegged to nation-state currencies, because we could finally actually get there, because we've designed ways on-chain to keep stability without having a bank account connected to like some blockchain.
Awesome, thanks, Sam. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is for Sam. I'm starting to see a new phase in crypto, which is the separation of money and state. And even with USDC and USDT, you can kind of see that there are wrapped derivatives of them: 3-curve, Frax, DAI, you name your color, right? At a certain point, regulators are going to realize, like, we cannot actually like pause transactions. Where do you see the market moving next?
Yeah, I mean, so you could pause transactions on fiat coins, right? They have the custodial blacklist, which is what people are pretty worried about. So like, if people didn't know, a lot of the fiat coins have already blacklisted and stopped redemptions of hundreds of millions of dollars of USDC and Tether, for example. So that's already happening, right? For example, Frax, DAI, and UST, the largest on-chain decentralized stablecoins, there is no blacklist. We actually literally can't do anything because people own the actual token, they own claims to the collateral and the actual pricing. So my personal opinion is, no matter kind of what happens in terms of the dollar-pegged stablecoins, what the SEC or the Treasury Department says, is going to be interesting to see what governments think about non-sovereign units of account, right? And so that's still a couple years away. It's cool that Frax is building like the first stablecoin in that kind of generation of products, but it's going to be interesting. I have no idea, but obviously they don't like the fact that the dollar stablecoins are unenforceable. There's no blacklist. There's no KYC and AML and stuff.
Any other questions?
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess this is directed towards Sam. Sorry, you're answering everything. I was just wondering if you look at the CPI and you say that the whole basis for it was its reliability through 80 years of following the same basket, and it's supposed to be a reliable source for inflation, and then you went ahead and almost opened that Pandora box of saying there's a political aspect of it, whether that actual basket is changing or the demand for the goods within it is changing. It just seems to draw parallel to what you're doing with Frax, as far as if you are tracking a CPI, don't you see that you need to develop your own CPI? And if you do that, I guess how do you decide who has a say with what products you're tracking, and how do you go about deciding that?
Yeah, so obviously the long-term goal here is to be able to have your own definition of a stable unit of account that keeps your standard of living. To start out, we're obviously going to use what the U.S. government says is the current consumer basket of goods. But Frax actually has a governance token, right? The FXS token, which stands for Frax Share Governance Token. And it's for governing the actual protocol, right? And so obviously, no matter kind of like what parameters are being set or things like that, they'll be decided by the governance token holders. That's already how new collateral types are put on for Frax's dollar-pegged stablecoin. So if there is in the future going to be voting on the weights of this basket or the composition of it, that depends on what the governance token holders have to say, right? And I think there will be, but the thing is, one step at a time. We're first going to try to make the FBI stablecoin have billions and billions of dollars in market cap, just like Frax. See how it goes. No one's ever done this before. No one's ever actually created a stable unit that's not pegged to the dollar on chain. So we'll see.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, one last question. This gentleman right here.
Not for me, please.
Don't worry, this one's not for you. This is actually for Mike. I know you said for the EthSign part, you would take the document, you hash it, put it on the blockchain. Just playing devil's advocate, like to understand it, would Docusign basically be doing the same thing, except they hash it and they store the hash values on their servers? And then I guess maybe like the files are stored decentrally, but like, is that the main difference? And if like, in theory, if Docusign came out and just said, we're gonna put it on blockchain, is that how?
Yeah, so we don't run any of our own servers. I think that's the biggest difference. Docusign, they can access any of their documents because their servers technically hold those data, right? And another thing is, if those servers go down, it means the files may be tampered with or lost. Nobody knows. But on the blockchain, on Ethereum, it's so decentralized. It's the consensus layer. It's the security layers. So if the signatures are stored on there, we're not saying it's 100% safe. Nothing's 100%, right? If whatever war happens and all nodes go down, then everybody's done. But as long as majority of the nodes are still up and running on Ethereum, and we think it would because it is the most secure layer of smart contract blockchain, and our signatures are safe, your files are safe up there, and Arweave is really cool. Your files once uploaded to Arweave, it gets stored up there permanently, right? So it's the permanent storage protocol. That's something that's never been done before, just because of the nature of their architecture and the network, the way the network works.
Okay. And do you think the idea of like making something verifiable via like decentralized verifiability, like could that be expanded to other things more than just PDF documents?
Give me an example of that. Like,
I don't know. Maybe like if you took like financial transaction records from like a bank, and then say I just wanted to make sure that it's not tampered with.
Yeah, they can do it pretty. So they can do it pretty easily with something else, actually.
As long as it has an API, Chainlink oracles can really send anything on chain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any type of data.
Exactly.
That's why Frax is using it for FPI. That's why Mike uses it in EthSign with keepers, and that's why Larry also desperately wants Chainlink price feeds on IoTeX.
Got it. Thank you.
And there's something else you might want to look at. It's called the AR drive. It's really user-friendly. You can send any documents up there just and store it on Arweave. All you pay is, I think with a couple gigabytes, you only need to pay like $10 to $50, worth of Arweave tokens, which is not that much for a couple gigabytes file to be stored there for 100 years.
You said AR drive?
AR drive.
Okay. Is it okay if I ask another? How does that compare to like IPFS?
IPFS, it's really for our users. IPFS, you have to continuously pay IPFS Filecoin. in order to store their data up there. And it makes no sense for someone to say, like, I sign a document, upload a document, but I have to keep paying money in order to save my documents up there, right? Like Docusign doesn't even do that. So we want to be an improvement. We don't want the trouble of, continuously paying money. That's why we store on RV. You pay once, and those files, they're stored up there forever.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Stick around. There's still pizza and beer. If you want to continue the conversation, join us on Discord, join us on Telegram, follow the Chainlink Twitter @Chainlink. Thank you.